Maldives, minutes away from the 4th edition of the WION A Global Summit.
I hope you had a good lunch. Welcome back to the 4th edition of the WION Global Summit. Our world today is battling a once-in-a-lifetime economic crisis, something that, like this, has not been seen since the Second World War. We have the highest unemployment since the Great Depression. People across the world, in very large numbers, are locked out of jobs. The pandemic is expected to have cost our world $16 trillion already. 16 trillion. And the International Monetary Fund estimates that this figure will go up to $28 trillion in lost output by 2025. It is imperative to take stock, to build back better. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time to begin the third session of the day, World Economy, the Price of the Pandemic.
$16 trillion. That's the estimated cost of the pandemic. The world paid with lives and livelihoods.
Is the time to keep going, to keep working, to grab hold of the opportunities that lay in front of us. So let's step forward together.
Digitization is the new normal. Social distancing has steered automation. The world is shifting away from agglomeration, gravitating towards green policies. Sustainability. What we now need is a coordinated global response. What we now need is to bounce back as one. Joining us for this session, Abdul Ghafoor Mohammed, Foreign Secretary of the Maldives. Alexander Dinkin, President, Primakov National Research Institute of World Economy and International Relations. Jacek Rostowski, former Minister of Finance of the Republic of Poland. Ian Golding, former Vice President of the World Bank. Alexander Downer, former Minister of Foreign Affairs, Australia. Moderating the panel is international TV presenter and journalist Ali Aslan.
Hello everyone, welcome back. Lovely to have you back here after lunch for a very pertinent session, of course. The first two sessions have already provided, I believe, a very credible, very intricate and insightful picture of what a pre-pandemic world can and probably will look like. Now we go a bit into more detail and look at what, of course, is very much at stake, namely the economy. And so we have esteemed panelists joining us for this session, both on stage and virtually. Let me start with the two gentlemen here right on stage. Abdul Ghafoor Mohammed, we know that the economy has been taking a hit during this pandemic. Many shutdowns have led to insolvencies, unemployment is high, and so on, so forth. From your own country, how do you assess the current economic situation?
Thank you. Thank you very much. First of all, let me thank the organizers of WION, this conference, for inviting me to this panel. It's always a pleasure to be here. It's my second time. When we look at the Maldives and what the COVID has affected, how it has affected the Maldives, as a small island developing country, we are one of the worst affected. We are a small population, scattered islands, very small economy. We are tourism-dependent country mainly, and last year when the pandemic hit us, we had to close down our borders. For about 3 months, our borders were closed and we had no visitors, which meant the only source of income for the country was curtailed. So we became overnight a no-income country, as our foreign minister often says. It has also affected our people, especially in the Greater Malé area, which is where a large percentage of population resides. This has hit especially hard on the small and medium enterprise industries, people who work on daily wages, because we had some restricted lockdowns. Their incomes were affected. But the government took a lot of measures to help these people, providing them with income support. And we also had a lot of support from our neighbors and our development partners, which helped us to sustain the economy. We had a shortage of over $800 million shortage in our budget, and our debts increased greatly. So these are issues which we will have to grapple with, and for the foreseeable future, while we are optimistic, we will have to be very careful in managing our economy and ensuring that the livelihoods of people are kept on an even keel.
The livelihoods of people, of course, very much at stake here. The numbers are quite staggering indeed. Economists are saying this has been the biggest slump since the Great Depression. Quite depressing indeed. Alexander Dinkin, now unless your name is Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk, really there has no one been spared in this particular year during the pandemic economically, has it?
If you look at Russian economy, I guess that Russian economy weathered this crisis much better than all previous global crises. Part of the explanation is that we have a rather good risk assessment. If you look at Russian National Strategy for Science and Technology, which was signed in December 2016, it was said that the second global challenge would be the global pandemics. And I guess this is the part of explanation why we were managed to produce the Russian vaccine, which is used very widely right now.
Yeah, the Sputnik vaccine, of course, seems to be a success story depending on what the scientists are providing, and which brings me, of course, to the vaccine rollouts, which is a huge part of the recovery process. Ian Golding, you are joining us from the UK, from Oxford, as a former vice president of the World Bank. You've seen quite a bit of slumps and recessions during your lifetime. How bad is this one? Have you seen anything like this throughout your tenure at the World Bank?
No, this is the worst economic crisis in my lifetime. I think it is, in many countries, the worst on record. In the UK, we're saying it's the worst in 300 years. So this is dramatic. What's been extremely unusual, of course, is it's very uneven. As you know, we've seen stock markets booming. The technology firms have been doing extremely well. So some parts of the economy are doing okay. Governments are preventing bankruptcy. So it's very unusual in terms of crises, because mostly in crises you expect firms to go bankrupt. But in the rich countries, which have found $15 trillion to support their firms and to support workers to some extent, the government actions have stopped the worst impact. Globally, though, it's disastrous. And for Africa, I think for India, South Asia, and for Latin America, we're seeing a massive economic hit. And of course, the World Bank estimates that 125 million more people have been pushed into extreme poverty as a result of this pandemic. So many more people will die of starvation than will die of the economic of COVID-19 around the world. And that is something which we require much more solidarity for. While the rich countries have found $15 trillion for themselves, less than 0.5% has gone, 1% has gone to developing countries, well under $100 billion. So this inequality between what the rich countries are finding for themselves and the rest of the world is one of the very different things to previous recessions where we've seen a more even global impact.
So income inequality has been rather stark even before the pandemic, has been aggravated now throughout this pandemic, says Ian Golding. We've already taken the temperature, if you will, and how the Maldives have been faring, how Russia has been faring. Let me bring in Alexander Downer. Australia has had quite a harsh lockdown for a couple of months straight, seems to have weathered quite well, judging by the headlines. How's your economy been doing throughout this year?
Yeah, well, Australia's situation is going to be different from a lot of countries. It's an island. It's relatively, albeit a huge island, it is relatively remote. So what the Australian government did from January last year was begin to restrict entry into the country. And now there are very strict rules, and there have been for a year, on entry into Australia. So COVID is not indigenous to Australia, so can only be brought in. So if you control the people who come into your country, that will stop the spread of COVID. And there have been very few cases of COVID in Australia and extremely few deaths. So it's been, I think, a little over 100 deaths from COVID. So what is the economic impact? A lot has been closed down, and from time to time in particular parts of Australia, there have been real lockdowns. And the federal government has essentially funded all of this. So you have seen a huge blowout in the country's budget deficit and an explosion of public debt. But unemployment, the government spending has worked, I suppose. Unemployment has not risen too much and is now below 6%. And the economy is recovering quite strongly. So, by the time you get to June this year, the Australian economy will hardly have shrunk at all over the previous 12 months. So, but Australia's, I'm not sure this is an example to the rest of the world, because Australia is a huge island and it's easy to control people coming in and out. But, industries like the tourist industry, international students and so on have suffered grievously. But on the other hand, there has been a very big increase in commodity prices. So iron ore exports, coal exports, food exports, they've all been going very well. So Australia hasn't done too badly compared to the rest of the world.
Australia hasn't done too bad compared to the rest of the world, says Alexander Downer, certainly perpetuated by the fact that, as you pointed out, you are an island, which helps, of course. Jacek Rostowski, Poland is not an island. Europe is not an island, for that matter. And the numbers that we are getting from Europe are quite troubling indeed, both, of course, in terms of the human toll, but also the economic ramifications. If I understand correctly, Europe and Poland is just going back into yet another a lockdown. Economically, quite a difficult situation, isn't it?
Yes, indeed. I mean, Poland did rather well in the very first wave by having a very sharp and very extensive lockdown, and it had a very low level of infection. But then over the summer, things were loosened up very considerably, mostly for political reasons. The ruling party wanted to be able to hold elections over the summer. That was convenient for them. And that, taken together with the development of the British variant, Kent variant, has resulted in an absolute explosion of infection and indeed death throughout Central and Eastern Europe, but as you said, particularly in Poland, already in the autumn, and with renewed strength from the beginning of this year, and particularly now. Things are, from the point of view of fatalities, even worse, for example, in Hungary and the Czech Republic, but it's a general, so far, economic losses have not been that big because it's on manufacturing as opposed to tourism and services. And as the Australians have noted, the recommodification, the increased importance of goods relative to services has actually meant that Australia, as a producer of raw materials into the goods, has not done badly, and the producers of the goods, Central and Eastern Europe, as part of the German supply chain, has also done relatively well so far. But dealing so badly with the later waves of the pandemic has meant that the situation is extremely worrying for the near and medium-term future, of which I suppose we'll talk about a bit later, because there's a lot to be said about the world picture.
Extremely worrying indeed, and I think everybody has echoed here without any exception how difficult, economically speaking, psychologically of course as well, but economically speaking this year has been. Foreign Secretary, global tourism is of course one of the sectors that has been hit the worst. We are coming to you live from Dubai, one of the major tourist destinations all around the world, which surely and undoubtedly has felt the impact. Your country, of course, as well. How have you been able, if at all, to alleviate that loss and that suffering?
Well, with the closure of tourism, as I mentioned before, we were in a very hard situation, very difficult situation. But since July, since opening up our borders and with very cautious health measures taken to ensure the safety of those who visit the country, our tourism is slowly recovering. We are cautiously optimistic that by the end of this year, we would be able to gain reasonable progress in our tourism industry. We had to change our markets. Our traditional source markets had been Western Europe, Japan, China. With these markets closed down, we did not have visitors from there. But luckily, we have been able to attract alternative markets. India has emerged as the largest tourism market over the last few months. So have Russian tourism has increased considerably, as well as from Eastern Europe and Central Asia. In fact, Middle East has also increased in numbers we are seeing from Middle East as well. So there has been a slight shift in our source markets. This has helped to keep the industry rolling out and becoming to survive. We, in fact, we have had over 500,000 tourists arrival this year to date, which is quite encouraging. And during the Christmas New Year period, all of our tourist facilities were quite full. So these were the good things that happened, that we are able to diversify our markets, and we do hope that with the opening of the European markets later in the year, hopefully with the vaccine rollout, that our industry will come back to what it was before, even if not fully, but to reasonable amount.
Yes, we all hope that, of course, for your sake, for everybody's sake, that we will get some sense of normalcy before too long. Alexander Dinkin, you said that Russia has fared relatively well, managed relatively well throughout this pandemic. Are there any lessons from your point of view? You're a very experienced economist. You're looking around the world, not just within Russia, but abroad. Are there any lessons that you can disperse, that you can share with some of our audience members that has worked for you, that has worked for your country throughout this time?
It's not necessary lessons, it's just occasion. connected with the structure of our economy. For example, the small businesses is responsible only for 22% of GDP. The small businesses is normally the most vulnerable part of the economy, and for us, it's not as burden as for, let's say, European countries. Secondly, as a whole, the services also, it's something close to 60% of GDP, not much, and services is also vulnerable. Among the lessons, I may tell you that we decisively closed the borders with China on January 23 last year, very decisively. And we introduced lockdowns immediately, rather sharp, and it permits us, I keep my fingers closed, to miss the third wave until present. And anti-crisis policies was very much targeted. It was not a helicopter money. It was targeted to most vulnerable part of the population and most vulnerable part of the economy. This is the combination. And of course, very, how should I say, strict financial and monetary policy, because our public debt is something like 15% to GDP compared to all other countries. We have controlled the deficit of the budget. So this is a combination of occasions and targeted policies.
Ian Golding, Alexander Jenkin mentions China. Interestingly enough, the country that by all accounts, by all objective accounts, the coronavirus originated from, yet China is the only major economy to actually grow in 2020. Mildly perhaps 2.3%, but a growth nonetheless. How do you explain that? How do you explain this phenomenon of China, a country that has battling this crisis very badly and was hit by this crisis at the beginning of 2020 and seems to be blossoming at this particular point, economically anyway?
Yes, I think the Chinese leadership have done a remarkable job in containing the virus and ensuring that the economy remains robust. And so it has been and is the engine, as it was incidentally after the 2008-9 financial crisis, the engine of economic growth, really pulling the rest of the world along with it. Of course, it's also increased its exports, not least of medical equipment and computers, as people are working more and more remotely. So you see the export stats being quite robust, and its market share has increased during the pandemic as other producers have closed down. So far from deglobalization, we're actually seeing an acceleration of globalization in many facets, including, of course, this session. And that is very good for China, which is riding the globalization wave. Investments increased, not least from the US. During the Trump years, we saw a very rapid increase in the final last years, 2019, 2020, record investment from the US and from many other places in China to take advantage of this to diversify assets around the world. So on trade, it's done well. In investment, it's done well. And of course, the population has been very effective at managing this, wearing masks, following the rules, and that has helped contain it. And East Asia generally has done well, so China's integration with the region has also been a part of this great success. So yes, the economic center of global gravity is moving more rapidly than it would have towards over East Asia as a result of this.
And Ian, if I may follow up, because you are an international observer of economic systems out there even long before this pandemic, is there any one particular economic system that has done better, that has fared better throughout this pandemic than others?
Well, people are trying to compare many things. Do democracies do better than autocracies, different countries? And there's no simple answer to your question. The people that have done best are the people that follow the World Health Organization's advice the quickest, who've got the capacity domestically because they weren't in debt previously or high levels of debt to turn on the taps of quantitative easing, of fiscal stimulus to support their companies. So countries that are able, that have the fiscal space and the monetary space and who follow the guidelines quickly of the WHO have been the most effective. Many of them have been led by women. And there seems to be some correlation between female leadership and success, but there are also many other countries, and it's not rich or poor. Countries like Vietnam, for example, Mongolia, have done astoundingly well. In Europe, Greece is one of the best performers, although it's one of the worst countries in terms of economic capacity and capacity in some other areas. So there's no simple rule. Some of the richest countries, the UK, obviously, US, have done terribly in many respects. And indeed, those with some of the greatest scientific capacity. The US has the best scientific capacity in the world. UK is very good, have not done very well. And it might be that the more powerful you are, the more arrogant you are, you think you can do it your own way, and then you have big problems. So there's no simple answer as to which countries have done well, other than having fiscal space really matters. And there's a lesson for the future in that we need to ensure that we have that resilience that comes from governments being able to be effective. Cutting back governments, having a weak national health service undermines one's ability to cope with crises like this. And that's a lesson, I think, of the years of austerity, which have been accelerated since the financial crisis. And of course, following the rules, not least global rules, really does make a big difference in this respect.
Following rules, of course, quite essential. We're all trying to do it on a global scale. Alexander Downer, one thing is for certain, some sectors have been hit harder than others, and human conduct, human behavior, not just as an individual but as a consumer, has also changed, of course, inevitably as a result. We can no longer go freely shopping as we used to do. E-shopping now has taken over in many regards. What changes do you think to human conduct as a consumer and will have changed, but more importantly, will be with us for some time to come, perhaps even in a post-pandemic world?
Yes, well, there are a whole lot of questions there. Whether there'll ever be something called a post-pandemic world is an interesting question. But there'll be vaccines and the risks will be minimized, but COVID won't go away, so people are going to have to learn to live with it. So as they learn to live with it, in countries that have very severe restrictions on day-to-day life, as the restrictions are lifted, some things will return to as they were. But I would say there are a couple of things, at least in Western countries, that will be permanent changes. One you mentioned is that there will be more emphasis on online shopping. In the UK, for example, online shopping is having a huge impact on high street shops, traditional shops, and that was happening before the pandemic. So that pattern will, I think, be accelerated, and I think you'll see that in my own country, Australia, and through Europe and North America. I think in terms of shopping malls and the whole process of shopping, there will be a change, not a revolution, but a change of emphasis. I think the second thing is work. Polling is showing people don't mind working from home, but they don't always want to work from home. So I think you will find in both the public and the private sector, people taking maybe 2 days a week to work from home instead of 5 days a week going to the office. They've learnt the huge advantage of not commuting, for example. In the UK, people are getting out of bed on average half an hour later than they used to before the pandemic, which makes a bit of sense to sleep through the lockdown for as long as you possibly can. But seriously, I think there will be that change in work patterns. That means that corporates and even governments will need less space, and they will have less office space. And with less office space, that will have an effect on the commercial property market in major cities. So I don't think those markets are going to return to exactly what they were before. So, I mean, I think there are a couple of changes. I think a couple of social changes that will become locked in. But I think also the huge increase in government spending right around the world. It's going to be interesting to see what medium-term consequences that has. and what impact that's going to have on living standards down the track. It's okay now, but down the track, what will be the impact? And what will be the social impact? I think that's hard to judge.
And social impact is, of course, what's leading me to the next question, Jacek Rostovsky. When asked in 1992 as a candidate, U.S. President Bill Clinton, when he was asked about the most important issue of the election, he says famously, it's the economy, stupid. And we do see that people are rising up. We do see people unhappy. We do see them frustrated. We do see them suffering unemployment quite high throughout the world, but in Europe as well, of course. Do you foresee, the longer this economic crisis lasts, do you foresee also political changes? Do you see that governments they are already under increased pressure, but do you see some form of public pressure, increased public pressure on governments worldwide?
Well, we've already seen that most governments don't do terribly well if they've been through this first part of the pandemic and come up to elections. The defeat of Donald Trump is one example, and we can see the poll ratings for many other governments in power across democracies don't necessarily hold up well, although there are some exceptions, the UK being one. I think one of the ways that it might be useful to think about this is that we still have a huge level of uncertainty around this epidemic, both, first of all, at the medical level, and therefore we don't know what the correct policy is likely to be. I mean, we've got vaccines coming on stream extremely fast, much faster than one might have expected, but at the same time we have variants developing, which might mean that we'll be going through a succession of waves as the evolution of the virus and the development of the vaccines come into conflict. And the reaction then on the economic side might be repeated and unexpected lockdowns and restrictions. And if we put that together with the huge increase in government debt and in the quantity of money that has been created by central banks, which has been mentioned by previous speakers, then essentially what has happened is that the two key governments that are involved and the central banks that are involved in determining market conditions in the world, particularly as far as financial markets are concerned, in other words, the United States and Europe, have had to take a bet on what is likely to happen. And the bet they've taken, more in the United States than in Europe, but nevertheless on both these continents, is that things will be bad and that the expansion has to be extremely large. Now, it may in fact turn out that that's wrong, that the vaccines will be extremely effective fairly quickly, in a matter of 6 months or so. And then it's quite possible that we'll be faced with a surge in inflation, certainly in these two areas, and maybe worldwide. And then there'll have to be a period of quite sharp monetary policy contraction, and we might go into quite a longish stagflation. The other possibility, but in the end, the bottom line of all this is, both as far as the debt problem is concerned and as far as the monetary policy problems are concerned, or monetary policy conditions are concerned, is will it be possible to maintain interest rates as low as they have been for the last, well, it's now quite a long time, coming on for 8 years, and they've been trending down. If it is, the debt problems and the fiscal sustainability problems will not be very great, even for relatively weak countries. If, on the other hand, the interest rates rise sharply, and they might do, as in the scenario that I described, then that's going to be a problem even for financially powerful and fiscally previously conservative countries. So I think we're really facing a sort of bifurcation, two possible scenarios in the world. And frankly, it's very much up to what happens in that race between the vaccine and the virus on the one hand, and what happens to other things which underlie this long period of low interest rates, which is demographic developments, technological change. And we don't know at this stage what it's going to be. But one thing we do know is it's going to be surprising and politically dangerous, and also dangerous from an economic policy.
Absolutely. Politically dangerous nonetheless, no matter in which geographic region you find yourself in. I think that's become abundantly clear from your answer. Alexander Dinkin, we talked in detail about China, about how China has weathered this conflict and this pandemic, rather. And India, we are, of course, at the WION Global Summit. India is another country that seems to be doing relatively well compared to the rest of the world. Sitting in Moscow and looking at Delhi, how do you assess the situation? How do you evaluate it?
My take is that, in post-pandemic world, we are facing a challenge, a threat of bipolar disorder of the global, let's say, world order. You understand? I mean China and United States. And in this case, I guess that India have to play more greater role in shaping the post-COVID global order, because India is one of very few powers which is still, let's say, independent from all capitals around the globe. When we look at Europe, you remember that during the 45 president, during Mr. Trump, idea of strategic autonomy spreading across the European capitals, not anymore. Everybody happy with the leadership of the Washington. So I guess that India is the very important player in the post-COVID global order. And regarding resistance to COVID, no one country could repeat the Chinese, let's say, recipes, including India. It's very different, everything. But anyway, I agree with you that India is doing relatively well in comparison with some other places.
I think we have firmly established throughout this session how dire the situation is, but we do want to leave the audience and our viewers with an upbeat note, if it is at all possible throughout these difficult times. Foreign Secretary, what gives you hope? What makes you optimistic in a post-pandemic world and post-pandemic economy in particular? What are the signs that give you hope that we will be back on track at some point, if perhaps not back to a pre-pandemic world economy, but on an improved track nonetheless? What gives you hope?
Well, what has sustained Maldives over the past year and a half or so has been its relationships, its friendships, its partnerships with the rest of the world. And as like other small countries, we hope for a stronger multilateral framework where these kind of global issues are dealt with collectively through cooperation among everybody. One of the things that Maldives had hoped for and we had been helped by is the debt suspension initiative. These are issues which require global cooperation, and unless there is such cooperation, it would be difficult for small countries like the Maldives to survive or sustain its economies. During the worst times of the pandemic, we were helped by the international community, by our friendships with our partners, through provision of food, because we are an import-dependent country, and without that kind of support we have had, it would have been very difficult. So we are thankful to the international community, and we believe that this has shown to the rest of the world how important it is that the world come together to tackle these issues in the interest of all.
Partnerships and solidarity have grown throughout this pandemic. That is at least the experience that the Foreign Secretary has shared with us. Ian Golding, is that also your assessment? Has multilateralism prevailed? Has cooperation improved throughout this pandemic, or has it been more like everyone out for themselves?
I think the pandemic has demonstrated we need much more multilateralism. We need to reinforce the World Health Organization, and we need to also have international organizations on other crises. The international financial organizations, the development agencies will become increasingly important. I think the jury is out. My hope is that we're going to reinforce it. Of course, we saw President Trump withdraw during the pandemic from both the climate and the World Health Organization agreements. President Biden coming back has been absolutely right. But now we need to make a commitment and reinforce it. And I totally agree with the previous speakers. We've learned a lot. And one of the things we've learned is about the importance of national solidarity within our countries and between countries to stop future pandemics and other major crises.
Are you hopeful? Just quick answer. Are you hopeful, Ian Golding, that things will be okay?
Yes, I think this could be a crisis that is the big wake-up call, in the same way that the Second World War gave way to an international new order, to the United Nations system, to global solidarity, Marshall Plan, Bretton Woods institutions. This could be the moment that really teaches us that if we carry on as business as normal, we're heading over a cliff. But of course, what the First World War teaches us is that unless we really do wake up, we can be in a cycle which goes downwards that led to the Great Depression and an even worse war. So we really need to hope that we're in that Second World War sort of moment and that we do change our ways. If we don't, then we're going to have a series of escalating crises. I'm hopeful that it's a wake-up call that we'll hear.
Alexander Jenkin, Abdul Ghaffur Mohammed, Jacek Rostovsky, Ian Golding, and Alexander Downer, thank you so much for your insights, for your experience that you have lent to this session. And as much as we tried, as dismal and difficult and exhausting at times as the situation is, we tried to end on upbeat, on a positive note, and hopefully those predictions will come true at this particular point. Gentlemen, this is your applause. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We are, of course, at the WION Global Summit, and I'm pretty sure that most, if not all of you, are familiar with this network. For the very few who are not familiar with the work of WION, let's have a quick look.